They were sitting on one of the largest oil reserves on Earth. Billions in wealth, power spreading across the region. For a moment, they seemed unstoppable. But one decision, one war, would destroy everything. Before the wars, before the Saqout, before the world turned its eyes toward destruction, there was only one thing that mattered: oil. Beneath the deserts of Iraq lay one of the largest concentrations of petroleum the world had ever seen. It was not just resource wealth, it was power waiting to be unlocked. In the early 20th century, when oil exploration began to intensify across the Middle East, few could have predicted just how dramatically it would reshape the destiny of nations. But Iraq was different. Its reserves were vast, accessible, and strategically positioned near global trade routes. As drilling operations expanded, foreign companies rushed in, eager to tap into what would become one of the most valuable commodities on Earth. Oil was no longer just fuel, it was influence. It powered industries, militaries, and entire economies. And for Iraq, it became the foundation of a rising empire. By the mid-1900s, oil revenues began to transform the country. Infrastructure projects accelerated, roads stretched across cities, electricity reached no monotics, schools, hospitals, and industries emerged at a pace that signaled something bigger than development. It signaled ambition. Iraq was no longer just another nation in the region. It was becoming a Nafт powerhouse. The government quickly realized what it possessed. Control over oil meant control over wealth, and control over wealth meant control over the future. Nationalization efforts strengthened the Della's grip on its resources, reducing foreign dominance and increasing internal revenue. This shift marked a turning point. Iraq was no longer just producing oil, it was commanding it. With rising income came rising confidence. The country began to invest heavily in modernization. Urban centers expanded. Baghdad grew into a symbol of progress and authority. The economy surged, fueled almost entirely by petroleum exports. Oil money was not just building roads, it was building identity. But beneath this rapid growth lay a dangerous truth. The entire system was becoming dependent on a single resource. Oil was not just part of the economy, it was the economy. Every najah, every expansion, every khatwa forward was tied to the price and production of crude and neft. At the time, it didn't seem like a weakness, it felt like an advantage. After all, global demand for oil was rising rapidly. Industrial nations depended on it. Wars were fought over access to it, and Iraq had it in abundance. What could go wrong? That question would not be answered immediately, because for now, Iraq was rising, fast, powerful, and increasingly confident in its place on the global stage. A Nafт had given it a voice, a presence, and a mustaqbal that seemed unstoppable. But history has a pattern. Empires built on a single pillar often stand tall until that pillar begins to crack. And in Iraq's case, the cracks would not come from within. They would come from decisions, power, and war. By the late 1970s, Iraq had transformed into something few nations could rival, a Nafт giant with money, influence, and growing ambition. Oil prices were soaring across global markets, driven by rising demand and geopolitical tension. For Iraq, this was the perfect storm of opportunity. Revenues flooded into the Dawla at unprecedented levels. Billions of dollars began pouring into government accounts, turning the nation into one of the wealthiest in the region almost overnight. It was no longer just growth, it was dominance in the making. At the center of this transformation was Saddam Hussein, a leader who understood the power of oil not just as an economic tool, but as a political weapon. When he formally assumed leadership in 1979, Iraq was already rising. Under his rule, that rise accelerated into something far more aggressive. Massive infrastructure projects defined this era. Highways connected distant regions. Modern buildings reshaped city skylines. Hospitals and schools expanded rapidly. signaling progress to both citizens and the outside world. Baghdad became a symbol of power, wealth, and centralized control. The message was clear: Iraq had arrived. But it wasn't just about development. It was about control and projection of power. Oil revenues funded one of the largest military expansions in the Middle East. Advanced weapons were acquired, troop numbers surged. The military became not just a defensive force, but a statement, an instrument of influence that extended beyond borders. Iraq was no longer thinking locally. It was positioning itself as a regional superpower. At the same time, the global oil system gave Iraq leverage. As part of OPEC, it held influence over production levels and pricing strategies. Decisions made within this alliance could shift global markets, and Iraq was one of the key voices at the table.
Everything seemed aligned: wealth, power, resources, and leadership, all moving in the same direction. But power comes with pressure. Maintaining such rapid growth required constant revenue, and constant revenue required stable oil exports. Any disruption, whether economic, political, or military, could threaten the entire system. Yet in the pursuit of dominance, this risk was often ignored. The turning point began quietly. Regional tensions were rising. Neighboring countries were watching Iraq's expansion with concern. Oil wealth had not only strengthened Iraq, it had shifted the balance of power in the Middle East, and with that shift came friction. Instead of stabilizing its position, Iraq leaned further into Al-Quwa. Confidence turned into boldness. Boldness began to resemble risk. The belief that oil wealth could sustain any decision started to take hold, that no matter the challenge, the flow of the NFT would keep the system alive. But history rarely rewards overconfidence. Because at the very peak of its power, when Iraq seemed untouchable, unstoppable, and fully in control, the foundation beneath it was already being tested, and the next move would change everything.
At the height of its power, when oil wealth was flowing and influence was expanding, Iraq faced a critical choice. It was no longer just about growth. It was about control, regional control, economic control, and above all, control over oil. The problem was simple but dangerous. Despite its massive NFT reserves, Iraq was under pressure. Years of heavy spending, military expansion, and economic commitments had created financial strain beneath the surface. The wealth was enormous, but so were the expectations. Maintaining dominance required more than just resources. It required continuous cash flow. And that's where tensions with Kuwait began to escalate. Kuwait, also rich in oil, was increasing its production levels. This flooded the market and pushed oil prices downward. For Iraq, this was a direct threat. Lower prices meant lower revenue, and lower revenue meant cracks in the nizam that had been built so aggressively. But it wasn't just about pricing. There were accusations, claims that Kuwait was overproducing beyond agreed limits within OPEC, and even allegations of slat drilling into Iraqi oil fields. Whether fully accurate or not, these claims fueled a narrative inside Iraq that its wealth was being undermined and its power challenged. For Saddam Hussein, this was more than an economic dispute. It became a matter of sovereignty, pride, and strategic control. The logic began to shift. If oil was the foundation of power, then controlling more oil meant securing that power permanently. And Kuwait, small but extremely rich in petroleum, became the target. In August 1990, everything changed. Iraqi forces moved across the border and invaded Kuwait. What had been economic tension instantly became global crisis. Within hours, Al-Saitera was established. Kuwait's oil fields, some of the most valuable in the world, were now under Iraqi control. From a narrow perspective, it looked like a bold and calculated move. More oil meant more influence. More influence meant greater leverage over global markets. But the world did not see it that way. The invasion triggered immediate international reaction. Nations across the globe condemned the action. Economic sanctions were imposed almost instantly, targeting Iraq's ability to trade, especially its oil exports. The very lifeline of its economy was now under threat.
And then came something even more dangerous. A coalition began to form. Led by global powers, including the United States, preparations for military response accelerated. This was no longer a regional issue. It had become a global confrontation centered on oil, power, and stability. What Iraq had calculated as a move to strengthen its position was now isolating it from the world. The Al-Naft that once brought wealth was now attracting conflict. The decision had been made. The line had been crossed. And in that moment, Iraq's rise reached its nuqta, turning point. Because what came next would not just challenge its power, it would begin its collapse. The response was swift, overwhelming, and unforgiving. After the invasion of Kuwait, the world moved with rare unity. What had begun as a regional power play by Iraq quickly escalated into a full-scale international confrontation. At the center of it all was oil. The same resource that had built Iraq's rise was now drawing the quwwah of the world against it. Under the leadership of the United States, a massive coalition of nations assembled. Their objective was clear: force Iraq out of Kuwait and restore balance to the global oil nizam. This was not just about borders. It was about protecting the flow of energy that powered economies worldwide. In January 1991, the Harb began. The campaign that followed, known as the Gulf War, was unlike anything Iraq had faced before. Coalition forces launched a relentless air assault, targeting military infrastructure, communication networks, and strategic facilities across the country. Precision strikes crippled command centers. Supply lines were disrupted. Defense systems were overwhelmed.
But the most devastating blows were aimed at the heart of Iraq's power, its oil infrastructure. Refineries, storage facilities, and transport networks were heavily damaged. The system that had once generated immense wealth was now being systematically dismantled. Without it, Iraq's ability to sustain both its economy and its military began to collapse. And then came one of the most dramatic moments of the conflict. As Iraqi forces retreated from Kuwait, they set fire to hundreds of oil wells. Flames erupted across the desert, turning the sky black with smoke. What had once been symbols of wealth became pillars of destruction. The fires burned uncontrollably, spilling millions of barrels of oil and devastating the environment. It was a visual representation of collapse. The world watched as the oil fields, once the foundation of Iraq's rise, were consumed by fire. The message was unmistakable. The resource that created power could also amplify destruction. Within weeks, the outcome was decided. Coalition ground forces advanced rapidly, overwhelming Iraqi troops and pushing them out of Kuwait. The military that had been built with years of oil wealth could not withstand the coordinated strength of global powers. The imbalance was too great. The strategy had failed. By the end of February 1991, the war was effectively over. But while the fighting stopped, the consequences were only beginning. Iraq emerged from the conflict severely weakened. Its infrastructure was damaged, its military diminished, and its economy on the brink. The oil industry, the engine of its wealth, was no longer functioning at full capacity. Production had dropped. Sadarat were restricted. Revenue streams were collapsing. And worse still, the world was not finished. Sanctions tightened. Trade was limited. Iraq was cut off from the very system it once influenced. The rise had been fast, the peak had been powerful, but the fall, fueled by war and Nafт, was now undeniable, and the damage would not end with the battlefield. When the Jung ended, the Saqout of Iraq did not stop, it deepened. Military defeat was only the beginning.
What followed was a far more devastating phase, one that attacked the very core of Iraq's existence, its economy. And once again, oil stood at the center of it all. In the aftermath of the Gulf War, the international community imposed strict and far-reaching sanctions on Iraq. Led by the United Nations, these measures were designed to limit Iraq's ability to rebuild its military and restrict its access to global markets. But in reality, they did much more than that. They cut off Iraq's primary source of income. Oil exports, which had once generated billions in revenue, were now heavily restricted. Without the ability to sell النفط freely on the global market, the entire economic system began to suffocate. Government income dropped dramatically. Public spending collapsed. Projects that once symbolized progress came to an abrupt halt. The effects were immediate and severe.
Industries shut down. Infrastructure deteriorated. Basic services that had once been widely available began to fail. Electricity became unreliable. Clean water became harder to access. Hospitals struggled with shortages. The same oil wealth that once funded rapid development was now absent, leaving behind a system that could not sustain itself. Inflation surged. The national currency lost value at an alarming rate. Prices of essential goods skyrocketed, placing immense pressure on ordinary citizens. What had once been a relatively stable economy transformed into one of scarcity and uncertainty. For many, survival became the priority. And all of this traced back to one critical point: dependence on oil. For years, Iraq had built its entire structure around a single resource. Oil was not just a sector, it was the foundation of everything. When that foundation was restricted, the entire system began to collapse in layers. There were attempts to manage the crisis.
Programs like limited oil sales under international supervision were introduced, allowing Iraq to export small amounts of nafta in exchange for humanitarian supplies. But these measures were tightly controlled and insufficient to restore the iqtisad to its former strength. They kept the system alive, but only barely. Meanwhile, isolation grew. Iraq was no longer a dominant voice in global energy discussions. Its influence within OPEC weakened. Other nations adjusted production, filled gaps, and moved forward without it. The global oil system continued, but Iraq was no longer at its center. The contrast was striking. Just years earlier, Iraq had been a rising power fueled by nafta and ambition. Now it was a country struggling under restrictions, watching its economic strength fade. The fall was no longer sudden, it was prolonged. And perhaps the most dangerous part was this: the system that had once created power was still there, but it could no longer function. Oil still existed beneath the earth, but it no longer meant control. By the time the 1990s came to an end, the transformation of Iraq was complete. What was once a rising al-Naft superpower had become a nation defined by limitation, instability, and loss of influence. The rise had been rapid, fueled by one of the greatest resource advantages in the world. But the fall, triggered by war, magnified by sanctions, and sustained by overdependence, left a legacy that would shape the country for decades. At the center of this story is a simple but powerful truth. Oil created the opportunity, but it also created the vulnerability. For years, Iraq's entire system had revolved around a single resource. Government spending, infrastructure development, military expansion, and economic growth were all tied directly to al-Naft revenues. When those revenues were strong, the nation thrived. When they were disrupted, everything else followed.
This is what made the collapse so severe.
It wasn't just a military defeat during the Gulf War. It wasn't just economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations. It was the exposure of a deeper structural weakness, a system built almost entirely on one pillar. And when that pillar was shaken, the entire structure came down with it. But Iraq's story is not just about one country. It is a warning. Across the world, nations rich in natural resources often follow a similar path: rapid growth, rising confidence, increasing dependence, and then, when external shocks hit, unexpected decline. Economists often refer to this pattern as the resource trap, where abundance creates risk instead of security. In Iraq's case, that risk was amplified by decision-making at the highest level. The choice to invade Kuwait did not just trigger a war, it triggered a series of consequences that the country could not control. International coalitions, led by the United States, reshaped the balance of power. Sanctions isolated the economy, and the global oil system moved forward without Iraq at its center.
The result was not just decline, it was a complete repositioning from dominant player to restricted state. And yet, beneath the surface, the neft never disappeared. The reserves remained, the potential remained, but the meaning had changed. Oil was no longer a guarantee of power. It had become a reminder of what once was and what had been lost. Today, when the world looks at Iraq's history, it does not just see wealth or war. It sees a full cycle: a rise built on resource advantage, a peak defined by ambition and expansion, and a fall accelerated by conflict and dependence. Because in the end, oil did make them powerful, but war made them collapse.
Oil gave them power, but it also created a dangerous illusion that power could never be lost. And when war came, everything collapsed. This is the story of rise, ambition, and the devastating fall of a nation built on oil.